The plane has been in the air for 40 minutes when the man behind you puts the gun to the back of your neck. He doesn't say anything. Just press on. You keep your hands on the control stick. Then he speaks. Land, or I'll fly with you dead. Over the next 2 years, you will become the personal pilot of one of the most powerful men in Mexico. It will transport cargo that you will never see. It will land in places that don't exist on maps. And you'll discover that the cartel's most valuable. Pilots aren't paid to fly. They are paid to remain silent. The problem is that when you get to the top, you already know too much to leave. If you enjoy stories about power, survival, and the behind-the-scenes worlds that few people know, subscribe to the channel. Every week you'll experience a new life. Chapter 1. Take off. 6 months before that night with the gun to your neck, you had a life that seemed perfect on paper. Commercial pilot's license. 12 years of experience. Legitimate. Cargo flights between Ciudad Juarez, Hermosillo, and Monterrey. You knew every air current in northern Mexico better than you knew the habits of your own 4-year-old daughter. He was a good pilot. Better than good. The kind of professional other pilots sought out when they wanted to learn how to land on a dirt field with a crosswind at 3 in the morning. The problem was debt. Not the dramatic debt from gambling or addiction. The silent debt of someone who tried to start their own charter company and lost everything in a contract that wasn't honored. $180,000. A creditor who won't accept deadlines, won't accept negotiation, won't accept excuses. And a 4-year-old daughter who needs heart surgery that the health insurance refused to cover due to bureaucratic issues. You tried to get a bank loan. Rejected. You tried to find a partner. No one showed up. You tried to sell your equipment. It wasn't enough. It was in this state that a man named Rodrigo showed up at the hangar one Tuesday morning. Clean suit, expensive shoes, the air of someone who never expected anything in life because he never needed anything. He looked around the hangar as if inspecting a property he had already bought. He sat down in a chair without being invited. And he went straight to the point. He didn't say who he worked for. He didn't say the name of the company, the operation, the organization. He only gave the number. $40,000 per flight. 3 flights per month. Destinations confirmed only at the moment of takeoff. No questions about the cargo. No flight logs. No communication with air traffic control. Payment in cash, on the tarmac, at the end of each mission. You remained silent for 30 seconds. Not because I was assessing the risks, because she was calculating how many flights she would need to pay for her daughter's hospital bill. There were 2. You said yes before the 3rd minute of conversation. Rodrigo nodded as if the answer had already been decided long before you opened your mouth. He handed you a cell phone with a single number saved in its memory. He said you would receive the first call in 48 hours, and that, from now on, this cell phone was the only way to contact you. He stood up. He straightened his suit, and he left. No contract, no signature, no full name, no further explanation. Just your phone in your hand and the sound of your own footsteps in the empty hangar as you tried to process what you had just done. You still didn't understand the most important rule in the world. When someone like Rodrigo comes along with a proposal like that, the deal's already been signed. It just wasn't signed by you. Chapter 2. Cruising altitude. The first flight takes place on a Tuesday morning. You receive the coordinates at 11:47 p.m. via text message on the cell phone Rodrigo left. It's a dirt airstrip in the interior of the state of Chihuahua that doesn't exist on any civilian map, any aviation database, or any record from any authority. You spend 40 minutes locating it using GPS before you find it. 6 crates sealed with industrial tape are carried by 4 men who don't look at you. They board without speaking, without asking questions, without providing any information. Final destination, a farm 340 kilometers to the south, near the border with the state of Sinaloa. The flight lasts 52 minutes. No one speaks a word during the journey. You fly with the instruments, disabled for any external system. No transponder, no radio communication. The plane to the world doesn't exist during those 52 minutes. When you land, A different group appears to unload. The 4 who boarded disappear into the darkness without looking back. Rodrigo appears out of nowhere, as if he had been there the whole time, exchanges a few words by radio with someone you can't see, and points to a suitcase on the floor next to the plane. You open it. $40,000 in $50 bills. Real money. More money than you'd see in 3 months of legitimate work piled into a canvas suitcase in the middle of the Mexican desert at 3 a.m. You carry the suitcase onto the plane, and it flies back alone, with a complete silence of the night all around. The following week, the second flight follows the same pattern. Coordinates at dawn. Crates. Silent men. Landing in a place not shown on any map. Suitcase with money. Return flight. Your daughter's surgery will be paid for after the second flight. You'll do the third one anyway, and the fourth, and the fifth. On the sixth flight, something changes. Rodrigo is on board. He sits in the co-pilot's seat for the first time. He puts on his headphones as if he knows exactly what he's doing. He looks at the panels for a moment without speaking. Then he asks, without looking at you, "Do you have IFR certification?" IFR. Instrument flight rules. The ability to fly and land in zero visibility conditions, guided exclusively by onboard equipment. A skill that most commercial pilots don't develop because they've never needed it. Expensive to certify. Difficult to maintain. You say yes. Rodrigo simply nods. He jots something down on his phone. Good. This will matter a lot soon. You still don't understand what just changed, but you just leveled up without realizing it. The first 6 flights were a test of reliability, of consistency, of silence. What comes next is different. Next up is you. Chapter 3. Turbulence. On your 10th flight, you transport a person for the first time. It's not Rodrigo. It's not anyone you know. It's a man in his 50s, well-dressed, with the kind of bearing that comes from decades of authority. He boards with 2 bodyguards who stand throughout the flight with their hands crossed in front of them, and an expression of someone who hasn't slept in days and has given up trying. You don't ask who it is. But when you land in Guadalajara on a private airstrip inside a fenced property with armed security guards forming a corridor on both sides of the floodlighted runway, and when that man gets off and shakes hands with someone who clearly has authority over absolutely everything on the site, including the people with guns drawn, you begin to understand the scale of the structure you're working in. This is no backyard operation. The following week, Rodrigo shows up with new information. You will have a fixed co-pilot. His name is Cesar. 28 years old. Graduated from a civil aviation academy in Monterrey. Valid license. Good at the fundamentals, but with absolutely no experience in unofficial routes, landings without lights, flights without transponders. Rodrigo says you're going to train him, that Cesar needs to learn what you know the way you know it. You don't like that. Not out of jealousy of the position, out of instinct. If they're bringing someone in to absorb your knowledge, it's because the organization is planning on having redundancy. A second pilot with the same capabilities as the first is safe for the operation. For the first pilot, the calculation is different. Cesar is friendly. He asks the right questions. He learns at a surprising pace. On the first flights together, you observe how he absorbs the details, memorizes the coordinates, and learns how to interact with the men who carry the crates. It seems too natural. On the third flight with Cesar, during a break on a desert runway while waiting for unloading, he leans slightly toward you and says softly, in a tone that's too casual to be casual, "Don't you find it strange that we never know what's in those shipments?" You don't answer. Keep your eyes on the instrument panel even with the engine off, but you already know the answer. The pilot who starts asking questions about what's in the cargo is the pilot the organization begins to watch closely. Not because the question is inherently dangerous, but because the question signals curiosity. And curiosity in this world is the first symptom of someone who is thinking about doing something with the information they obtain. You learned this without anyone teaching you. Cesar hasn't learned yet. The problem is that you don't know if anyone in the organization heard his question, and you don't know if you'll be able to warn him before it's too late. Chapter 4. The Test. On the 11th flight, everything you've built is put to the test. You receive the coordinates. At 10 p.m., destination in the state of Sonora near the coast. Relatively simple route. Cesar is in the seat next to you, on his headphones, checklist in hand. The men have already boarded with the cargo. You take off at 10:40 p.m. The first hour of the flight is clear. Stable altitude, moderate wind. Visibility good enough to fly by visual reference. When you are 120 kilometers from the landing point, the encrypted radio that Rodrigo installed on the panel opens a channel. His voice is not urgent. It is instructive. Route compromised. Change of destination. New coordinates now. You record the coordinates while Cesar writes them down in the logbook. Then look at the map. The new coordinates are in a mountainous area to the north, within a mountainous zone you've never flown over. No mapped runways in any of your private files. No usable visual reference because the weather is closing in rapidly. Low cloud cover descending. Visibility dropping by minutes. Cesar is looking at you. What do we do? Rodrigo opens the channel again. The voice remains without urgency. The loading cannot be delayed. The landing has to happen. You have 3 options. Landing in an unknown area with near zero visibility using only onboard instruments. High risk. Very high. But you have the certification. And you have the equipment. Abort the flight. Return to the point of origin. It's the safe decision for you and Cesar. The consequences for the organization are unpredictable, but they probably exist. Ask for more time in the air, look for a break in the weather, try to calculate an alternative route that bypasses the fog. It might work. It might not. Fuel is limited. You don't hesitate for more than 15 seconds. Open the channel back to Rodrigo. I'm going to land. I need a 15-minute approach. What comes next are 11 minutes that you will remember for the rest of your life. Descent by instruments in an area without markings, without lighting, without any external reference besides the altimeter and GPS data that you yourself calibrated hours before takeoff. Cesar is absolutely still in the seat next to you. You can feel his breath, altitude, descent speed, angle, adjustment, adjustment, adjustment. The realization happens when you're no longer sure if there's a clue down there. The wheels pound the ground. The plane shakes. You apply the brakes with surgical precision. 2. Cesar releases the breath he had been holding for 4 straight minutes. Rodrigo appears 20 minutes later, getting out of a Jeep with its headlights off. He stands in front of the plane for a moment. He looks at you through the windshield. Then she says, in the calmest voice in the world, "There's someone who wants to meet you. You just passed the most important test of your life. And now you're going to meet the people who really make this world go round." At that moment, would you have aborted the flight or attempted a landing? Answer in the comments. Chapter 5. Flying over the summit. The man who wants to meet you is simply called El Viejo. You never find out the real name. Nobody uses it. Nobody even seems to remember that another name exists. 60-something years old, completely white hair. Shoulders that still carry the posture of someone who spent decades building something that others tried to tear down without success. A calm voice, like someone who never needed to shout to be obeyed because there was never a need. He's on a farm in rural Sinaloa that from the outside looks like an ordinary rural property. Inside it resembles a mountain resort with discreet security guards at every strategic point and cameras that you can only identify because you know where to look. He serves coffee. Then he asks about his daughter. By her name. This paralyzes you for a full 3 seconds. Not because it's a direct threat. Because it shows that he knows everything about the last 18 months of his life and never needed to use that information for anything. He's using it now to show that he could have used it at any time. It's a more effective show of power than any weapon. El Viejo doesn't give long speeches. He doesn't explain the organization. He doesn't tell the story of how he got to where he is. He makes an offer. You will become his personal pilot. Flights with him, for him, whenever and wherever he needs you. A fixed salary of $80,000 a month, separate from flight payments. An apartment in Culiacan provided by the organization. An armored vehicle with a driver available. And, he says with the same calm with which he asked about the coffee, a document signed by people you will never meet guaranteeing formal protection for you and your daughter. In return, full availability. Any time. Any destination. Any weather condition. No questions about cargo or passengers. And absolute loyalty. A loyalty that, he explains with all the serenity in the world, is more permanent and more binding than any contract you've ever signed in your entire previous life. You say yes before he finishes explaining. There was no other possible answer in that room. Over the next 3 months, you become part of the innermost core of the operation. You fly El Viejo to meetings that take place in locations not listed on any public agenda, to talks with politicians who appear in national news as fighters against organized crime, to meetings with people who control ports, airports, and routes in 3 different countries. You learn his rhythm. You learn what it means when he closes his eyes during light turbulence, when he looks out the window for more than 2 minutes at a time, when he asks you to reduce altitude without explaining why, and he learns his worth. On an afternoon flight between Mexico City and a private airstrip in Yucatan, El Viejo looks ahead and says, without turning to you, "You're the only pilot who never asked anything." You don't answer, but he understands that he has just received the highest praise anyone can receive in this organization. The problem is the silent weight that this praise begins to place on everything. Chapter 6. The Price of Altitude. Cesar disappeared on a Thursday in October. You find out through the silence. Rodrigo doesn't mention the name. The other men in the hangar don't either. The chair where Cesar used to sit to do the checklists is empty. His logbook, with its neat handwriting and the route calculations he habitually did by hand, is still on a shelf. Nobody moves the notebook. You don't ask what happened, but you know. Cesar asked the wrong question, or he asked the wrong person, or he tried to leave, or he tried to make contact with someone outside the organization. You'll never know which one it was. Maybe it was more than one at the same time. Something will change in you this week, something that doesn't have a precise name. It's not fear. You've been living with fear for months and have learned to file it, away in a separate compartment where it doesn't interfere with your flight instruments. It's clear. The clarity to understand that there is no safe position in this world. There are only useful positions. And when you cease to be useful, or when the risk equation changes, the organization recalibrates. You start sleeping less, paying attention to things you didn't before, observing who comes in and out of each meeting you're present at, even if you're just a pilot waiting in the hangar. A month after Cesar's disappearance, Rodrigo shows up with an unusual task. A flight to Guatemala. You and 2 other men you've never met before. Undescribed cargo. Landing on a runway that doesn't exist in your private files. Rodrigo hands over an envelope before takeoff. Inside, a photo of a man. Full name, address in Guatemala City, estimated time he would be at a specific location, and a handwritten phrase on the back of the photo, unsigned. He'll be on the plane on the way back, but he won't arrive. You held the envelope for 10 seconds without moving a muscle. Rodrigo waited. The logic was clear. A plane crash over the Pacific doesn't raise the same questions as a body found on a street in a foreign capital. And a pilot who has already demonstrated that he can land in the dark at impossible coordinates is a pilot who can, if he wants, cause a different kind of landing. You returned the envelope. No anger, no drama. I'm the pilot. I don't do the rest. Rodrigo remained silent for a moment that seemed longer than it actually was. Then he put the envelope in his suit pocket. He turned and left. Nothing happened that day. 3 weeks later, you wake up at 2 a.m. to find 2 men in the bedroom of the apartment in Culiacan that the organization provided. They aren't displaying weapons. They don't threaten you. They simply hand you a cell phone that's different from the usual ones and inform you, with perfect courtesy, that El Viejo wants to talk. You sit on the edge of the bed and answer. His voice is the same as always, calm, without urgency. "I understand you have limits," he says. "Good. Pilots without limits make mistakes that are bad for everyone." You don't answer. He continues. "But don't forget that your limits also have limits." The call ends. You survived your first rejection. For now. Chapter 7. The point of no return. 18 months within the organization. You have enough money that you don't have to think about money for a long time. Your daughter had the surgery she needed. She's fully recovered. She goes to school in a different city from where you used to live, with a different name on her registration form, using an alternate identity that the organization provided without your request or approval. You discovered this change 3 weeks after it had already been made. He called Rodrigo. He asked what had happened. Rodrigo simply replied that it was for safety, for his daughter's safety, and he hung up. It was at that moment that you definitively understood that there is no clean way out of a place that changed your daughter's name without informing you. The DEA makes contact on a Monday morning, not with a warrant, not with handcuffs, with coffee and 2 agents who show up at a coffee shop where you're expecting a different kind of meeting, and who sit at your table as if they'd already arranged it. They know who El Viejo is. They know the approximate number of flights you've taken. They know the states where you've landed. They know the dates. They want confirmation. They want complete routes. They want the names of the passengers you transported. They want any detail that can solidify a case they've been building longer than you've been in the operation. In return, complete immunity from prosecution. Protection program. Relocation for you and your daughter to another country, with new documentation and initial funding. You hear everything, then ask a question. Cesar, the co-pilot who disappeared. Do you know what happened to him? The 2 agents exchange a quick glance. One of them replies carefully, "He was one of our employees. We managed to remove him before the situation became irreversible." You process this in silence. Cesar was an informant for the DEA. He was on the plane next to you to collect data on operations, routes, and people. When the organization started to get suspicious, the agency removed him. And you, who never asked anything, who never raised suspicion, who never showed curiosity beyond what was necessary to accomplish the mission, ended up rising precisely because you didn't do what Caesar did. Irony has a bitter taste. You go 3 days without responding to the DEA's offer. On the 4th day, call the number they left. But not to accept the deal. To say that you need more time. Because you calculated both possibilities with the same coldness you use to calculate an instrument descent in the dark. If you open a channel with the DEA, the organization will find out eventually. Organizations of that size have eyes in places you wouldn't imagine. If you shut down the channel, the DEA will act differently, and you'll be at the center of whatever comes next. There is no safe option. The only choice is what type of risk you can manage with what you have. If you've made it this far, leave a like. Most people wouldn't survive this situation. Chapter 8. The Cage. 2 years and 3 months after the first flight, you are seated in a window seat on a commercial flight. Business class. Destination, Mexico City. Ticket purchased in your real name, with a document that is genuinely yours, from an airline that appears in all systems. This is the first time in 2 years that you've flown without being the pilot. The feeling is strange in a way that you can't describe to anyone who hasn't been through the same thing. El Viejo is in jail. It was a coordinated operation between agencies from 3 countries that lasted 18 months. You didn't know while it was happening. Rodrigo disappeared 2 days before the arrest began, which means he had information you didn't, or that he was always part of another layer of the story that you never got to see. The organization is not finished. Organizations of this size never end up the way they appear in the news. They reorganize. They redistribute authority. They reappear with different names, different structures, different people at the center. What changes are the faces. What remains is the logic. But his role in it was over. Not because you chose to leave at a moment of moral clarity, because the window opened and you went through it before it closed. It's different. Your daughter is in school in another country. She speaks another language now with such fluency that she sometimes surprises you on video calls. She will grow up without knowing what her father did during the 2 years it took to pay for the surgery she needed, and the 3 years of school that followed. Are you going to leave it like this? It's the only decision that, looking back, you're sure you made correctly. But here's what no one prepares you to face when you're finally on the other side. You still dream of instrument panels, of the specific pressure of the control stick under your hands at 3 in the morning at cruising altitude, of the particular silence at 200 meters when the engine is steady and the world below doesn't exist for any tracking system. And what you feel in those dreams is not fear. It's not regret. It's familiarity. The commercial airplane you're on begins to cross a zone of moderate turbulence. The pilot activates the seatbelt sign. Passengers around you tense up slightly. You're not tense. You automatically identify the type of turbulence by the movement pattern. Convective. Wrong altitude to avoid. Probably passes in 3 to 4 minutes if they maintain their course. It passes in 3 minutes and 40 seconds. This is the real cage. Not the organization. Not the armed men. Not the dirt airstrips in the Chihuahua Desert. The cage is what you've become. A pilot who flew routes that no system tracks. He carried cargo that no manifest describes. He knew the underbelly of the world that operates in parallel to the world where people make weekend plans and sleep peacefully at 10 o'clock at night. And now, sitting in a business class seat on a completely ordinary flight, he can't look at the flight information panel without calculating whether the route is optimized, whether the altitude makes sense for the wind he feels from the movement, whether the pilot up front is making the right choices. You didn't lose your freedom when you signed the implicit agreement with Rodrigo in that hangar. He lost when he went up. Every mission accomplished when others wouldn't. Every landing in the dark that cemented his reputation within the organization. Every time El Viejo looked ahead in the plane with the confidence of someone who knows. He'll get where he needs to go. Every right decision made at the right second. All of this has built something inside you that belongs to that world, and that cannot be returned. The plane begins its descent towards Mexico City. You look out the window. The city lights expand in the darkness like a map that only makes sense from above, and you automatically start calculating current altitude, descent angle, probable speed, estimated distance to the runway. Old habits. You close your eyes and try to remember what it was like to look at a city from above and not think about any of this. He can't remember. At what point do you think you would have crossed the point of no return? On the first flight, when did the money get into your suitcase? When did you meet El Viejo and say yes? Or when did the organization change your daughter's name and you did nothing? Answer in the comments. If this story captivated you from beginning to end, subscribe to the channel. And if you want to live another life in one of the most dangerous worlds that exist, click on the video that is appearing on the screen now. The next story begins where this one ended, with someone who believed they had control over how far they could go, and he discovered too late that he was never in control.